Brothers and sisters, we need to talk about doctrinal mastery practice. And really, what is it that we are practicing? So last video, we talked about how the setup was going to change, and we were going to have these two different days. And one of those days, there's going to be a major practice application. That'll be like the main point of that day. This is what we call in the industry the soccer ball, which covers the fundamentals of what doctrinal mastery is. On the top is the principles of acquiring spiritual knowledge, to act in faith, examine with eternal perspective, seek further through divine sources. The bottom half of the soccer ball has undergone some editing. But what does it mean to master the doctrine? It means to memorize key statements and references, know and explain the doctrine, apply it. And so how this breaks down then on our second doctrinal mastery day, so we'll spend about 5 to 10 minutes on doctrinal mastery day memorizing. We will spend 5 minutes on doctrinal mastery day and all of the contextual lesson day on know and explain. And then we'll spend 30 to 40 minutes on the applying the doctrine, understanding the doctrine. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So I want to use a talk from Elder Oaks to help you understand what we are practicing. This is from all the way back in February 2013. This is a proto-doctrinal mastery talk where he spoke to Seminary and Institute personnel, and he said that sometimes the most important things that we teach, the things that our students need the most, are things we take for granted, and we neglect to teach them because we assume that they are already understood by all. So what could he be talking about? And it's this idea. Followers of Christ think differently than others. Followers of Christ think differently. We take that for granted. We assume our students understand this. They don't understand this. Whenever you see a typical practice exercise, it's going to look like this. You're going to have this first chunk here, which is going to be a review of some sort of the principles of acquiring spiritual knowledge. This is to not be skipped, even though the variety is lacking and the redundancy is abundant. That's what Chad Webb wants. That's the vision, is that they will intuit these principles of acquiring spiritual knowledge. So as often as you can go over them and help the students to get them in their brains, that's in every one of these lessons. Then there is always a scenario that's going to be given. We could call it a case study. I do not want to call it a role play, and I'll explain that here in a second. But we'll call these scenarios and case studies. And then there is this significant portion here that deals with the practice. And since President Oaks said that what we take for granted in teaching our students is that disciples of Christ think differently, I want to call this a mindset practice. That's why I don't want to call this role play. Role playing is where we ask students to get up and to practice responding to a very specific situation. And it's almost as though what we're trying to get the students to do is to have a bunch of really good things to say if ever somebody does the situation that we had in seminary, that we practiced in seminary. Then that's not the point at all. The point is not to practice how to respond. What we're trying to do is practice how to think. And when we realize that this is mindset practice, then it doesn't matter what the scenario is. The scenario could be anything. It's just another opportunity to practice thinking like a disciple. And so that's what that whole section is meant to do. Help us think like a disciple. And this takes practice. Rather than thinking of this as a lesson, we should think of this as a workshop. Once a week, a workshop on doctrinal mastery thinking. What Elder Oaks promises us is that if we will help our young people think clearly about gospel truths and how to apply them to the challenges they face, then they will be built upon the rock of the Redeemer. This is what will put them on a sure foundation where they cannot fall. We've got to help them learn how to think. It's important to realize that these three principles of acquiring spiritual knowledge, although you will often see them in this order in your practice exercise materials, it's important to realize that you don't have to go linearly through them. This isn't like a recipe where you have to start with act in faith and end with seek divine sources. What you actually ought to be doing, they should be working cyclically. And as you have a scenario or a case study presented, you might feel that starting with seeking divine sources or examining with eternal perspective would be a better place to begin than acting in faith. And so just because the manual puts it in a certain order doesn't mean you have to go in that certain order. So I want to end this video with this challenge, this invitation from President Oaks, that in order for us to live in the world but not be of the world, we're going to have to identify the error and exclude it from our thinking, our desires, and our actions. And this is the only way we can move forward with confidence in these troubled times. We've got to know how to identify the error and get rid of it. That's what we're going to try to practice with these doctrinal mastery exercises.